If you enjoy what we do on these podcasts, please go to mwpnews.com. There you can see articles about some of the movies we've seen, some things that we don't talk about on podcasts, and links to ways you can support the show. Thank you. Good morning, happy Monday, and welcome to 30-Minute Reviews. I am Adam, mostly back to normal after my recent bout with illness. Now, we were going to do the 2019 Lion King today in prep for next week's Mufasa, the Lion King. And then I decided not to do that because we already talked about the Lion King once this year, and there's not too much deviation between the Lion King and the 2019 Lion King. It's basically just a remake, but with photorealistic animation instead of the same animation, the 2D animation. And what more can we say about that? Plus, I fucked up a little bit, and I'm not afraid to admit it. I made the mistake of forgetting that Captain America Brave New World, which comes out in a few weeks, or a few months actually, comes out on Valentine's Day. That movie is a Incredible Hulk sequel. And if you've read the title, you know we're not talking about the Incredible Hulk today. We're talking about Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Because I watched that already to get ready for this episode, and I was like, we really should do the Incredible Hulk too. I don't have a place to put it in. And I do kind of want to keep Eternals in there because I do really like Eternals, and we'll get to that when we get to it. And I feel like I'm going to contradict a lot of what I have to say about Eternals here in this, because I think, let's get into Captain America, the Winter Soldier, which I think of the releases from Marvel Studios, this movie came out 10 years ago at this point, because it came out in 2014. And I think it holds up very well. And I think it holds up in a way that a lot of the more modern Marvel Studio stuff doesn't. And part of that, I feel, comes from the fact that we're still set in this era of Marvel Studios where they have to prove themselves. And I think, too, what this speaks to is that really the best writers of Marvel, besides Jon Favreau, are Marcus and McFeely. The writers who did, I believe they did the first Avenger, they did this, they did Civil War, then they did Infinity War, Endgame, and then I think, if I remember correctly, they're coming back for Doomsday and Secret Wars. Not only can they handle these large ensemble casts, but when it comes to this, which to an extent is kind of an ensemble cast, because it's a movie with, Captain America as the lead, but Black Widow's here, you have Falcon, and it's Falcon's introduction, and then you also have Fury as a major character. And then it does kind of do what we see happen later on in Infinity War and Endgame. Whereas, if we need to bring in a character from somewhere, let's bring them in. You have Jasper Sitwell, who has a major role. Gary Shandling is back from his role in Iron Man 2. And then there's other things in here, too. It sets up, this is the first introduction of Doctor Strange as someone who does exist in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but you don't lay on that moment. And I think one of the things that makes this movie and the other movies they've done work in a way that other Marvel projects haven't is everything here comes down to character. It's always character first. Every character in this movie, let's rephrase. I don't think Black Widow really necessarily has a want in this movie until toward the end. But by and large, every character, Steve has a want. And yes, we're dealing with this broad, wide-reaching, universe implication level thing. Not entire MCU, but up until this point, S.H.I.E.L.D. is kind of a mainstay. Because let's keep in mind where we were with this. You have like, at the time that this movie came out, it's been Iron Man, Iron Man 2, you have Incredible Hulk, you have Captain America, you have Thor, um, you have Avengers, you have Iron Man 3, and then you have Thor the Dark World. And S.H.I.E.L.D. has been kind of this through line since the beginning of this idea that there is this broad, far reaching government organization that is there to protect people. And we're taking it and we're infesting it with Hydra. Nazis have taken over this organization. What would that be like if Nazis were to take over major government organizations? How would we ever know what that's like? Now, joking aside, because, we're going to be looking at that in, a month and a half, like, the idea that we're going to take this and throw this hand grenade into one of the largest organizational things of the MCU is an interesting thing, but by and large, that's not what the movie's about. The movie's about Steve, and how does Steve deal with, living in this world that is so profoundly different from the world he went into. The world of World War II, like, as a soldier for Steve, it's a very black and white morality. It's, we're the good guys, they're the Nazis. It's very easy to be like, we're going to kill them and just be done with it. Like, it's, we kind of see that in, like, what was that? Creature Commandos. There's that, like, GI Robot is like, I'm here to kill Nazis. I was told I could kill Nazis on this mission. When can I start killing Nazis? It's a very clear kind of like, we're here to kill Nazis. Like, that's what it is. It's the Inglourious Bastard line. And now we're getting into this question of morality. This question of, like, well, why are people doing these things? And there are people who have motivations that are not entirely pure evil, who are acting in ways that are dangerous to the status quo, and that is what S.H.I.E.L.D. is here to protect. It's a very interesting kind of nuanced question, and then Steve having to grapple with that creates for an engaging story. On top of that, inside of that, his best friend, the only other person, one of the two other people he is friends with, that is from that time. He didn't know he was alive. Not only is he alive, but he's been brainwashed. So it's also this fight for the soul of Bucky, the beginning of that, because really we get into that more in Civil War. But it is this idea of, like, I'm here to do this, but I'm also here because of my friend. And I think that's a really engaging place to put this character. And I think what this movie does very well, too, is it does a great job of immediately endearing you to Sam Wilson. Like, the introduction of Sam Wilson in this movie is great. Everyone remembers On Your Left, because it's this great comedic beat where it's like they're doing this jog around the National Mall, and Steve just keeps lapping him, and On Your Left, and he just keeps lapping him. And it's this great comedic beat, but that's not the moment that stands out to me in this movie with Sam. There are three other moments, really, that Sam has that really shine and make it easy to like him. Like, number one, you have the moment right after that, where it's like he, excuse me, it's not totally gone yet, the cough. He's sitting on the ground next to this tree, and Steve comes over, and they immediately have this great chemistry between the two of them. Like, he got off to a late, oh, you must have ran 13 miles. Oh, really? I must have got off to a late start. Oh, well, take another lap then. Did you do it already? Yeah, I assume you did it already. Like, that whole thing, and then immediately, like, getting into the conversation of, like, how are things compared now to the old days? And he's like, well, internet's great, and, like, no polio, that's fantastic, and, that whole thing. He's also trying to catch up on things, and he tells him to listen to the Trouble Man soundtrack. It's this immediate kind of, like, this like, friendliness that the two of them have. That's great. Then the second moment that really stands out to me about Sam is that Sam is now out. He works for the VA. He no longer serves in the military. He's just working, he's running a support group with the VA. And we see him in this group helping these people who are dealing with severe post-traumatic stress try to move through it. And that's the other thing that, immediately it sets you up to, this is a good person who's going to do the right thing. And then it's a 1-2 punch combination of, and I say these two things together. It's really two different moments, but I'm going to combine them into one. It's two separate moments. First is after they get back from Camp Lehigh, which is not the real place where the contaminated water is. Camp Lehigh, where Captain America was trained and where they did the experiments. And even though that's not really the case, that happened in Brooklyn. But regardless, he has the, you know, after that, he goes back and he meets with Sam. And he goes, everyone's out to kill us. We have no one we can trust. We're here to trust you. And without a second thought, he looks around to see if they were followed and is like, all right, come in. And there's that where they have breakfast. And then you get to, right before the third act, and they're setting up the plan. It's like, all right, we have these things. We got to put them in the helicarriers, and then the helicarriers are going to all fire on each other. It's going to take them all down. And then, like, Fury's like, well, we're going to, what we're going to do, like, we can salvage what we can. And he's like, no, S.H.I.E.L.D. has been infiltrated. There's rot from within. Everything needs to be burned down. We cannot keep this as it is. And then I forgot what Natasha says. And then he turns to Sam and he goes, don't look at me. I just do what he does, but slower. And at this moment where it's like these two don't have a history with each other. They, Steve didn't serve with them. There's very little prior history between them. But he's immediately like, look, Captain America is here. And there's another thing where, it's when they're in the house together, and he goes, Captain America is asking for my help. There's no better reason for me to step up. And it all just works. And again, this is a character we've never been introduced to. This is his first appearance. And it works so well. And the other thing is, too, it's like, another really small moment is this idea of, like, he needs the wings. Okay, where are the wings? They're in this facility. We need to get in and get them, and it's heavily fortified. And we don't see that. It's just the next scene he has them. We don't need to watch the break-in. We don't need to watch any of that. It all just kind of works. And again, what this all speaks to is this is a movie where, again, character comes first. As it should. That's the most important part of any movie. I, as a viewer, have to engage with the audience, with the characters in the movie, and I have to feel like I have a connection to them. Everyone in this movie we're dealing with fantastical elements. It is a sci-fi thriller, at its core. But at its core, I still relate to Sam. I still relate to Steve. And I understand what they're doing and why they're doing. And it's not just this idea of like, oh, well, all these people are going to end up dead. It's like, no, these are people who, because an algorithm says they could be a threat, are going to end up dead. And it's a very interesting movie to revisit as we move into the next 4 years. I think this is a very well done movie, and looking at this and then looking at where we go in the future as we head into Brave New World, the question I have is, will this weigh on Sam? How much will this weigh on Sam, rather? Because from here we go to Civil War, which is this conflict over, it's continuing the same debate. What is our role in the world? Because fundamentally that's what this is about, and that's kind of what Natasha touches on at the end, where it's like, you're not going to come after us because we're still the best defense you got. And it's basically the same thing that Tony Stark says in Iron Man 2 when he's standing before Congress and he goes, I have successfully privatized world peace. And that is exactly what this kind of is. It is a continuation of that very subtle kind of thread through this, where it's like we have these people that we trust to have our best interest at heart, but what if they don't? And there are people who are going to be inherently mistrustful, especially in the aftermath of Infinity War and Endgame, where it's like, fundamentally, they failed. And I don't think that we quite have addressed how badly that failure could have impacted the world. Because let's just take this into consideration. Let's look at this from a grounded state. I don't think they've really done enough of this. And granted, there was COVID, which did kind of impact how they were going to portray this, because there was a plot line that was cut, and then they had to reshoot Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That featured a pandemic to kind of, Thanos was right, we're going to thin the population. And then they cut that because of obvious reasons, and they had to reshoot around it. But the fundamental issue that I have with the MCU in the post-Endgame era, well, there are two parts, and both of them kind of stem from this movie. Number one, the impact of the blip is not really addressed in any meaningful way. We get a bunch of, like, one-off jokes about it, like in, in Far From Home, where it's like, oh, we get to see everyone come back during the, during the basketball game, with the marching band that vanished during a pep rally has now shown back up during a basketball game, people running into each other. And it's like, I came back and my apartment was being rented out. It led to an uncomfortable situation. And it's like, what we're dealing with, by and large, in this situation, is half the population was considered dead for 5 years and then came back. 5 years is a long time, and we kind of see a little bit of that in Endgame when we have that thing where it's one of the Russos is there and Jim Starlin is there. It's a support group that Cap's running, and he goes like, I went out on a date, and then I cried. I made it to dinner and I started crying, and then he started crying during dessert, and it's this thing where it's like people are trying to move on with their lives. And realize that, oh, this is just it. And you have some really interesting places you can take that, because like these are people who missed key family events, people who weddings, funerals, like people who died outside the blip. Again, another thing that's a more serious moment, but does kind of get played as a joke, is in Multiverse of Madness. In Multiverse of Madness, there's that thing where it's like, the other doctor, the kind of a douchey other doctor. I mean, Strange is also a douche, and he's only a douche because, we're told Strange is the hero. But, like, he is this kind of, he's like, yeah, my brother died during the blip, and he didn't come back. And that is kind of the bit, like, that's kind of a big thing to kind of, like, it's a small moment for this character who's a side character that really we don't have any vested interest in following, but, like, that's kind of a big thing. And we see the same with Monica, when Maria died during the blip. Like, the cancer came back in the 5 years that Monica was dead. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, the wide-reaching implications of that are never really addressed. And that is one issue. The other issue that this movie kind of highlights is that, again, we're dealing with this broad universe, like, destroying implication by tearing down S.H.I.E.L.D., and this government agency was being run by Nazis secretly. But at the same time, the lore doesn't come first. First and foremost is the plot of the movie, and that's just a device in the plot of the movie to further Steve's plot. Like, Steve's development is defined in this movie by him having to deal with the realization of what's going on in S.H.I.E.L.D. And fundamentally, what the newer movies aren't doing is putting the development of the character first. With a few notable exceptions, don't get me wrong, but, like, I don't think Peter Parker really learns anything besides don't use magic to undo things. Which isn't really an issue because I don't think that was something that needed to. It's not something that's gonna come up every day. In No Way Home, the spectacle of that movie comes first. And things happen to Peter. But I don't think that's the important thing. Multiverse of Madness is kind of the closest, and I think this is the most, the best example of this. Like, Wanda doesn't exactly have Wanda doesn't have much of an arc in the movie. But Doctor Strange, they kind of try to fashion him an arc, at least. They make an attempt to make it look like they're giving him an arc. There's the, are you happy? Are you truly happy? And it's him trying to grapple with that question, and then also grapple with the question, did you actually do what was best for everyone, or did you just do what was best for you? And I think fundamentally we end up with the answer to that question to an extent in the movie, because we end up with this idea of seeing the alternate reality where, Strange does more. He uses the Darkhold, takes on, Thanos. Then they kill Thanos. And it's like, could he have done that in this universe? I don't know. They don't have Black Bolt, and they don't have, they didn't have Captain Marvel at that point. So, like, could they? Maybe. Who knows? Like, it's one of those weird situations where it's like, you're not really answering the thesis you're laying out. And that's kind of what it is. Like, what's Thor's arc in Love and Thunder? And it's like, I don't think he really has one. Like, Gore has more of an arc. And even then, that's not particularly well laid out, but Gore has more of an arc. Like, Shang-Chi is kind of going through the paces and trying to not be his father. And I would say even Deadpool doesn't have an arc in his movie. Like, this is a fundamental issue that is kind of here. It's like characters can be the focus in the new MCU in a comedic way or in a superficial way, but they're not going to delve deep into who the characters are. And if we look back on Phase 1 and Phase 2, the movies that were considered failures, quote unquote, you know, your Iron Man 2, your Thor the Dark World, like, the movies that are considered failures are the ones that don't give the opportunity to explore who the characters are. Because there's so much more bogged down. And it feels like where we are now is everyone is so bogged down in trying to build the next part of the overarching story and tell the next verse of the story that we're not moving anything forward in a clear and cohesive way. Which is a shame. And hopefully we get more... Like, I don't know necessarily if Brave New World is going to solve this problem. I would probably guess, I would assume this is going to be more of the same. I think the evidence at this point points more towards this being another Iron Man 2 type situation, where the world building and the overall grand arc story of the MCU is more important than the individual story in this movie. But at the same time, it's like, we won't know until down the line if that's the case. And we'll know if this movie fails, but like, or isn't as well received or isn't as good as the other three because that's the thing, we've had 3 really good Captain America movies. I know that the first Avenger is not really, everyone's favorite, and I skipped it because this is we're gonna go through Sam, with the exception of Infinity War and Endgame. We're gonna go through Sam's story, and then also the other kind of tangentially relevant things, but that's kind of where we are on this. But we'll see. Next, so Thursday we'll be doing The Incredible Hulk, which is where this was going to go, but no, we're doing Incredible Hulk there. And then from there we'll be doing Civil War, and then we'll be getting into, what is it? It's Civil War, and then the 6 episodes of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which will take us directly into Eternals, and then the next week is Brave New World. So, we're getting there. We're getting there. And until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.